Okay, let's continue.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ritz, you were dealing with the legislation governing asbestos over time. As I understand the position, and to summarize, prior to 1994, there was legislation, but that legislation didn't govern building materials which contained asbestos.
Chair, yes, that is true. The 89 regulation did not cater for asbestos-containing materials. So this was overseen during the assessment of asbestos and used all over South Africa to manufacture building materials.
Right. So before 1994, there was nothing governing the use of asbestos in a house.
No, not asbestos-containing materials, but the friable asbestos, if it was insulation material that they used around the geysers, for example, so that would be legislated.
All right. And we're dealing here mainly in this case with low-cost housing. The houses that we're dealing with, when would they have been constructed in the main?
Well, we've been mining asbestos in South Africa for many years, so manufactured all over this period, so no specific time of manufacture, but ever since we actually started mining the asbestos and using it in building materials, various houses have been made.
Perhaps mainly pre-1994, would that be fair?
Even after 1994, to some extent, because there wasn't legislation preventing the building with asbestos-containing materials up until 2001.
When were the regulations promulgated that dealt with asbestos-containing materials, including materials used in houses?
The regulation, Asbestos Regulation 155 of 2002, was promulgated in February 2002.
And then the steps taken against asbestos got more stringent. And what happened in 2004?
2004, around about 2004, the environmental minister at that time banned the use of any new asbestos-containing materials. So, yes, it was more stringent. You're not allowed to use any more asbestos in new products. And then the transport of asbestos and use in any building materials was banned at that stage.
And importantly for the present case, what happened in 2008?
2008 was a physical letter that was written by the then Minister Martinus van Schalkwyk, who banned the asbestos, the use of asbestos, and also suggested that we should start implementing a phase-out plan for asbestos and try to eradicate asbestos. If it is maintained and you can actually remove it, it should be removed.
Right, was this a suggestion, a requirement, a regulation?
This was actually
what was it?
Written up in regulation on the environmental side. So if we understand it, we are dealing with two departments. We are dealing with the Department of Employment and Labour on the one side, and we are dealing with the Department of Environmental Affairs on the other side. So it's two different pieces of legislation altogether.
All right, we may have to obtain that for the benefit of the chair, but it seems to me that there was a level of requirement from 2008 that asbestos be eradicated from buildings.
Yeah, or either maintained in a well-maintained condition, kept in a well-maintained condition, Chair, or, like I said, it should be removed, if at all possible, be removed. But in terms of the labour regulations, it's not banned at this stage even now.
Was any period suggested or required in this phase-out plan?
There were some suggestions in the communication that this phase-out plan should be over a period of 10 years as a potential time frame. Yes, Chair.
So the requirement to remove insofar as it existed in regulations or directives required the removal to take place or the securing of the asbestos material to take place by 2018.
That's correct. That would be correct.
Now, to become more particular or more detailed in relation to the facts of this case, you deal in paragraph 22 with the process and the requirements for the identification of asbestos. Please tell the Chair about that.
In terms of the asbestos regulation, Regulation 155 of 2002, it requires in Section 7 or Regulation 7 that an inventory should be drafted. Also, speaking about it in Regulation 14, that this inventory should be drafted by 6 months after the promulgation of this regulation, which is August 2002. Every employer or self-employed person was supposed to draft a inventory or do an assessment of all the asbestos on his property, the condition of this asbestos, the location of the asbestos, how much or quantity of the asbestos, what is the condition of such asbestos, and what is the potential exposure hazard to people in the environment, to the residents, to the employees. And this is a record.
My question perhaps wasn't too clear, Mr. Ritz. How difficult is it to identify asbestos in a building with any degree of accuracy?
To actually identify asbestos, it is a destructive test, so there's no instrumentation that you can use to identify asbestos. Press it up against a panel and it will say that this is asbestos. So it's a physical destructive test. You need to break off a piece of this material and send it for analysis. For a trained eye, you can with some certainty say that it is asbestos because of the condition, the look, and the amount of fibers that is in the asbestos-containing material. You can say that this material is suspected of being asbestos-containing material, but to totally positively identify any such material, there's an analytical way, a chemical way that we need to analyze the samples to positively identify.
Can one do it by reference to a digital map?
No, definitely not.
Google Maps, for example?
No, definitely not. The reason why I'm saying this is because even at a later stage, Chair, asbestos was in the same plant manufactured or as the new tech material that is nowadays used. It's got the same profile as the old asbestos panels. So it is possible that if there was any renovations done in one of these houses, you will definitely not pick it up. So you can't say with a certainty from a picture that this is asbestos. You can certainly say that there's a profile, we call it a Big 6 profile on the big roof sheets. So you can recognize a profile, but you can't positively identify asbestos that way.
If you, I'm sorry. What are the probabilities that you would be right if you look at, for example, the roof of a house? What are the probabilities that you would get it right if you say that's got asbestos?
Chair, in this situation, if it is low-cost housing and you have done some homework in terms of maintenance and repairs to any of this materials, there is a big possibility that you can actually identify with some certainty that it is asbestos material or suspected material.
So are you saying that if you haven't done any work in relation to a particular house or a particular set of houses, it would not be appropriate to just walk and look at the roof and say, okay, that one is asbestos, that one is not asbestos.
Chair, to clearly say it in a document that is asbestos, I wouldn't go as far because, like I said, there is a possibility of maintenance and replacement with other materials, as well as a possibility of other asbestos-containing materials within the same property, like ceiling panels and boards and window sills, which will definitely not be identified by just looking from the outside.
So would you say that professionally it would not be a reliable way of identifying houses that have got asbestos or this asbestos on the roof to just look at the roof with the naked eye? Or are you saying it can be reliable, but not all the time? What do you say about that way of doing things?
Chair, thanks. Yes, it is a possibility that you can make a good estimation of quantity of asbestos or asbestos-containing sheets or something that looks like asbestos by doing that way. But the whole purpose of the assessment in terms of a legislation is to look at the risk, the potential risk because of previous damage to these panels. It's been weathered, and there's a bigger risk now because the fibers is actually loosened and available to become airborne. So one needs to have a close inspection of this material to do a proper inventory and assessment.
And from your professional view, is that the way to do that would be to send it for testing or something?
Chair, yes, what we normally do from an assessment point of view is to go look at this material, assess it, look at the condition, and if it's ceiling panels, for example, we would break off a piece and send it for analysis to make sure that it is asbestos or not. So, yes, it's very helpful if you can quantify and write up all this asbestos material on a proper bill of quantities, because that will assist you in later removal plans and costing of such a project.
Well, several points arise out of that and your evidence after the long adjournment. First point is, what is the effectiveness of an aerial photographic view, such as one would get on a computer of a suburb? Can that be relied on to identify asbestos roofs?
Like I said, Chair, the only thing that you will achieve by that is to get a assessment, suspected asbestos-containing materials. You can see the profile, but apart from that, doesn't help you any in actually assessing the condition of the asbestos.
The second point is, if I stand outside the house and I take a photograph on an iPad, what would the position then be?
Still the same issue, Chair, that you can't actually talk to the quantity as well as the quality of the asbestos or the condition, and it will not assist in any way of eradicating the asbestos or setting up a bill of quantities. The purpose of doing a proper assessment is to actually prioritize asbestos-containing materials that is in a poor condition, so that they can be removed, or that can be removed at an earlier state, so that the cost can be spread over a period of time that's reasonable, maybe a 5 or a 10-year phase-out plan. And I think that is the reasoning behind the legislation.
So I understand you to be saying, Mr. Roots, that it's one thing to say that house has an asbestos roof. It's quite another thing to assess, for the purposes of eradication, a program of eradication, the condition of the house for the purposes of planning eradication.
Yes, Chair, I think the main purpose of the legislation is to ensure that the people, the residents of that property is safe, remain safe. and there's no risk of exposure. So if you just go around to identify or potential asbestos materials, it will not assist in the final purpose of such an assessment, is to see what is the risk.
I understand your evidence to say, too, that it's not only the roof, but it's the contents of the house that need to be identified and assessed.
Yes, Chair, that is the purpose. From experience, we can see that, for example, if I can use another example, if there's a hailstorm that comes through some areas, you will see that most of the damage is in the valley of these big 6 panels, and it is due to the fact that the weathering over a period of time has caused these panels to wear out a little bit thinner and thinner, and then hail will damage these asbestos panels. So when you do an assessment, you want to see if there's any cracks in the panels, what is the condition, is this still 1 centimeter thick material, and that will all give you an indication what is a potential risk in that house.
And I understand that any rational program of asbestos eradication involves prioritization exercise, where you take the high-risk asbestos-containing materials as a priority and the lower risk as further down the line. Am I correct?
Yes, Chair, definitely correct. The whole purpose of the regulation in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, not only the asbestos regulation, but any regulation connected to it, is to control the risk to people, residents, employees that work in that environment. And so in this case, the purpose would be to remove the material that is now hazardous. There's got a big risk to cause exposure, and then over a period of time phase out all the asbestos in an eradication program.
Now, this issue will come up later when you deal with the report, but when one comes to the stage of removal and disposal, in other words, eradication of asbestos, let's say in a house, who is empowered or authorized to do that work?
In terms of the legislation, asbestos work is done by a registered asbestos contractor, Chair, and these contractors are registered with the Department of Employment and Labour, and they go through a screening process, submitting the necessary documentation to ensure that the people that is doing the asbestos work is well educated, trained. They go for a medical, working on heights training, and these are the contractors that is approved to work with asbestos and remove asbestos and dispose of it safely.
And you've already told the Chair that when you remove, you release or generate fibres, and that creates a danger for the public and the workers themselves. How would you then conduct an assessment? We're going back now a stage from the removal. I think you've said quite clearly that the assessment enables a proper eradication process, and the assessment must have certain features or qualifications that will enable the removal to take place. And you will comment on the report that was generated in this matter against that background. But how would you properly, in terms of the relevant regulations, conduct an assessment then? If you could just briefly outline the steps.
What the normal assessment would involve is to do a desktop study, firstly to identify when this asbestos or material covering the roof would have been placed on it, more or less, so that one can get an idea of the time frame that the material was placed on the roof. The second option would be, stand is to actually go to the site and investigate, get access to the site. Sometimes it's difficult if it's houses, because you need to get access to the house to actually go inside and view the house from the inside to assess the condition of this material. Like I said previously, the building material of roof sheets used to be manufactured up to 54% of asbestos in cement materials. So if there's a high concentration of asbestos in this building material, obviously the risk, potential risk of exposure will be higher. And if this material then is in a poor state of maintenance, it will mean that the panels can break easily. And you need to assess this in terms of your procedures that you will follow to remove the asbestos. So the contents of my assessment would be a close visual inspection, taking of a sample to assess what is the amount of asbestos and the potential risk in this material, and then also look at the condition and prioritize which materials are the worst, and then put up a plan to start taking out the higher risk materials.
The report that you would draft after your inspection, identification and assessment, what qualities would that report have to have for it to be any use in any eradication program?
Chief, through the legislation, there is a guidance document out that outlines the format of such a report, certain requirements that needs to be on a report like that. Plus a example of what information is required out of this report. Like I said previously, the location of any such asbestos, more or less an estimation of the quantity of asbestos, what is the condition of asbestos, what type of asbestos it is, what controls have you got in place already to mitigate the potential exposure, and what lack or recommendations are there to maintain this asbestos in a good condition. So all this information will be captured on the official record that needs to be obtained and kept for 40 years.
You say in paragraph 29.11 that your company does work at a flat rate per day in relation to asbestos identification, assessment, and report. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What is that rate per day?
Currently, we're charging 3,000 Rand a day, flat rate.
And how many houses can you do in a day on your requirements that you've set out in your statement?
Chairman, in terms of this project that was done on the low-cost housing, the estimation of anything between 20 square meters and roughly about 40 square meters. I would suggest that we can do per person about 10 houses proper assessment per day.
So that would be, my arithmetic is correct, approximately 300 Rand per unit.
Roughly, yes, Chief, that's correct.
And you say you would have to add to that administration, travel and accommodation costs?
Yes, Chair, we've got a basic cost of administration fee of also 3,000 Rand per day. For example, a inventory report. So that can be split amongst 10 houses, so another 300, so roughly about 600 for the assessment as well as the admin cost towards that.
In relation to the asbestos audit in the Free State, you were approached by the investigators and asked to look at and comment on certain documentation.
That's correct, Chair.
The principal document is the report of 2nd February 2015, which is in bundle FS8 at page 270, but that document is before you. Is that the document you looked at?
Yes, Chair, that's a document.
You say you've worked in this industry for some time. decades in fact. Have you come across Blackhead Consulting Pty Limited in the course of your work?
Never, Chairperson.
And have you come across Diamond Hill Trading 71 Pty Limited?
Never, Chairperson.
What are the chances that those entities, maybe particularly Blackhead, could be quite active in the industry without you knowing?
Chairperson, currently, I think there's around, the last figures that I've seen, there's around 290 odd registered asbestos contractors in the country.
Yes.
I don't know and don't work for all of them.
Yes.
So I can't say that they are not active in the industry.
Yes.
I'm not aware of it. I've been involved in the industry with various role players in the legislation. And certainly in my dealings, I've never run across any of their names.
Are you able to say, in the light of how much time, how many years you have spent in the industry, and in the light of what I consider to be a high-profile status that you seem to have in the industry, because you told me about your involvement in the drafting of regulations and so on. Are you able to say whether out of those, I think you said 300 and something entities involved in the whole country, are you able to say you are familiar with a certain percentage of those that are quite active? Or is that something difficult to say?
Chairperson, I think it's quite difficult to say.
It's difficult, yes.
So
Okay.
many. I've certainly have dealt in different industries with a lot of asbestos contractors as well as people involved
Yes.
in drafting such inventories.
Yes.
One need to have a look at the legislation that don't call for a specific person or entity or body to do this inventory. It calls for a competent person to do such.
Yeah.
So it is also possible that if this entity is competent, they know enough
Yes.
about asbestos,
Yeah.
that they don't need to be registered as an asbestos contractor.
Yes. Okay.
But as soon as they start removing or handling asbestos, they definitely must be registered.
Okay.
You were asked to comment on the unit price of 850 Rand for assessment, and also the proposed costs for the assessment of 1,350. That, Chair, was the original price proposed in the proposal to the Gauteng Department of Human Settlements. But I understand you're unable to comment on that because you haven't seen the work clearly defined.
Yes, Chairperson, when I've actually had a look through the documentation provided to me, I was provided with one report, final report, as well as 5 examples of assessments that the company have done, and also the original proposal that was provided to the municipality. And in these documents, I don't think I've had enough information to make a clear statement about the cost. The 1,300 Rand certainly looked a little bit high in terms of the amount of houses that needed to be assessed. But yeah, I don't think I had enough information.
The scope of the work that was required, did you look through the documentation to learn what that scope was in any detail?
Yes, Chairperson, at the time when I assessed and went through the documentation, it was clear that there was very little in terms of defining the words audit and assess. For me, that was problematic. in terms of the requirement and to look in this final document if they actually achieved or done that was required in the original quote. So that was one of the problems, that the terms were not defined properly in the document.
In your opinion, were they defined sufficiently to allow, if they were complied with, a proper program of eradication?
Even with the proper eradication purpose or proposal, one need to have a proper bill of quantities to quote on the said project of abatement or removal of or eradication of the asbestos in the area. So if you can assess and properly define the amount of asbestos, you can actually give a price, a costing to that. If you haven't done that, you haven't assessed the risk of potential exposure, I think it's very difficult to put up a proposal on the eradication if you do not have that information.
Actually, if you haven't done that, wouldn't the position be that you have not assessed?
Yes, Chair, that is my whole argument, is that the documentation that was placed in front of me, given as examples, I find that is not enough information to call it a proper assessment in terms of the current regulation, what must be in an assessment, a proper assessment, and it will also hinder the phase where asbestos needs to be abated at a later stage or removed at a later stage, because there's definitely no bill of quantities. That will hinder the process further on.
Before you go on, and for the benefit of those of us who are not building experts, what is a bill of quantities?
Bill of quantities, Chair, is the amount of asbestos, the amount of houses, the amount of asbestos in each house, and that you need to define in terms of square meterage, in terms of the weight of the asbestos, because it comes into play when you have to calculate the amount of traveling that you need to do in terms of transporting this waste to a hazardous waste site, the time spent on the site, the amount of labor that you need to employ to remove asbestos, the amount of personal protective equipment that needs to be provided, accommodation maybe in that area, bins that you need to organize to place this asbestos waste in for the transportation, as well as a cost for the final and safe disposal of the asbestos. So all these things are published in what we use as the inventory. We just call that a bill of quantities. You can actually send and circulate that to potential registered asbestos contractors so that they can actually put up a price to remove or eradicate the asbestos.
And that information, was that contained in the report?
Chair, through the 5 examples that I had from the different assessments that they have done, no, definitely not.
And in order to obtain that information, would one need to do another assessment?
Chair, yes. This assessment will definitely have to be redone to get a proper bill of quantities to enable a tender process to remove asbestos.
You say in paragraph 34.2 that the output from the project that we're talking about today is a report. What does that report tell you?
Chair, the report that I had in front of me dated the 2nd of February 2015. In terms of my view of this, it is a scoping report of the potential problem of asbestos in a region or a district, and that is as far as it goes. It doesn't give any clear indication of how much asbestos there is. and what is a potential risk to the residents or people in the public, and doesn't give any indication about that. So, yeah, in terms of proper assessment, I would say that this is not a proper document that can be used. Maybe on a high level for Parliament, it might be a good document for them to use to see what is a potential risk, but in terms of eradication, definitely not.
Now, what is the significance of establishing the level of harmfulness or danger to the occupants of a house to not assess how serious the damage is or the risk to the residents? What is the importance of not doing that for purposes of the safety of the people who live in a house? In other words, if you are supposed to assess the houses for asbestos and you don't do that, you just stand in the street and have a look at the roof and not actually go and break it, I think you said, and or some pieces, and take them to where they're supposed to be tested.
Thanks, Jay. Yes, there's certainly some pros and cons doing an assessment. When we physically go out and do an assessment, we try to remove a piece in areas where it cannot cause harm to the residents, and the procedure would call for you sealing the portion where you actually removed and broken out a piece, to seal it so that you do not cause additional risk to the residents. But in terms of your question, it is also a matter of education of the people that stay in a residence like that. So if the community didn't properly educate the residents of a property like that on the potential risk and exposure risk and sources of airborne asbestos fibers while staying in a house, you will find that some of the residents might be busy with alterations themselves, removing some asbestos because of damage and they didn't maintain it properly in the past. So in this proposal document, you will see words like asbestos containing rubble, meaning stuff that people already removed from their houses and put on sidewalks and so on. So this asbestos is lying. There's a potential of vehicles traveling and pulverizing this material lying in a road or on the sidewalks or dead spaces, and then pulverizing and causing additional exposure. So if you leave the asbestos as is, you do not educate the residents on potential risk and tell them not to drill into the asbestos and put up fixtures and put in any alterations or make alterations to these materials, there's a risk that the fibers may be released during these processes and people will be exposed. They will inhale the fibers. And especially in certain areas like the Northern Cape where the chrysolite of the blue asbestos have been mined, there's this additive effect. So in the environment, there's potentially already some fibers, and if you then also go break panels and sand and abrade panels, you will add to that risk of exposure.
There was a reference, I think, in the documents to the scope of the work being audit and assess, I think, or assess and audit. I think audit and assess. The audit part, I take it, means identify the houses and tell us how many or which ones. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, Chair, I would...
And assess is then what you have been
the
explaining.
deeper.
Yes.
Yes, Chair. I would say that the first portion and the stuff that they have done might be the first portion, the audit portion.
The auditing portion,
Yes.
but not
but
the
assessment portion is lacking.
was not done
Yes.
properly or at all.
Yes. I would say.
Okay.
In paragraph 35, you summarize what might be your evidence in relation to assessment. You say the condition of the roof needs to be looked at. You need to establish how many residences are at high risk of potential exposure, what houses should be prioritized for eradication, and in addition to that, the specific information that a bill of quantities would provide, how much asbestos, where, in what condition, and how embedded in the residence it might be.
Yes, that's true, Chair. It will definitely assist in spreading the cost over a period of time. If we can prioritize high-risk areas in terms of asbestos that was maybe put up first, or residents that is busy renovating, doing some repairs to their roofs, or already removing asbestos panels and breaking it. So this assessment would be used to identify these houses or residents so that they can be treated first or handled first, and then the rest, panels that is in a good condition, maybe there was a plan by the residents to paint and seal the panels properly and nicely. This will be a low risk and they can be dealt with at a later stage. So you can spread the costs of eradication over a period of time.
You are asked a question by the investigators, and you record that in the report. Does counting houses with asbestos roofs justify the cost of 850 Rand per unit? And you then answer that by saying, well, there's a lot more involved in a proper assessment. Is that correct?
That's correct, Jay. As previously said, that we need to assess the condition of this asbestos to do a proper assessment, to look at any cracks, any renovations, any previous removal. In terms of the current regulation, it talks about well-maintained condition and sealed. So if you want to keep it in a well-maintained condition, you need to remove all mold and try to prevent mold growth, which will weaken the asbestos. So all these things will be looked at during an assessment of such asbestos properties.
Then you asked by the investigators, and you put it in your report, the price of 32,760 Rand, which was the price in the proposal for the removal of asbestos in this case, and you're asked to comment on that. The calculations that you do they assume a proper assessment?
Yes, Chair, the calculation that I did is taking into consideration that there's a proper bill of quantities set out with the amount of asbestos in each area, what is the distances that one need to travel between these areas. That will all help and assist you to do a proper costing of a project like that for the removal and tender process.
And your estimated cost?
Estimated cost for the removal varies from experience with current contractors, registered asbestos contractors that I work with. On this, if I can remember correctly, is about 7,000 Rand per house. I must just make sure from this. Actually done a little calculation. 4,329 Rand. And that is working on a house that is roughly about 20 squares. Low cost housing, very small. Obviously, if the house is bigger, it might be higher than that. But yeah, that is cost to the company that will remove it. So obviously, they still need to add a profit to this cost. But my estimation on a small house like that would be plus minus 5,000 Rand.
You were then shown and had regard to the report before you of 2015, of 2 February 2015. And you were also given a report by the investigators of houses that they looked at. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, Chair.
If you would just comment on the contents of the report as you do on page 19 of your statement and following.
The 5 examples, Chair, that I received gave a Google Maps picture of the property, which I actually by accident opened up on my computer and looked. It's exactly the same. And then also a street photo, somebody that took a picture from the street to show that this is asbestos, or a big 6 panel on a roof with a comment that it is asbestos. Apart from that, there was comments on the walls that was cracked in some areas, but there was no comments on the condition of the asbestos, the potential risk of exposure, and even size. The only size that I got was a document that was pulled off by, I think, the investigators at a later stage, 2018 or something, that gives a municipal size of the property itself, but not the dwelling, the house. So there's no indication of how much asbestos we are talking about on any of the examples that I examined.
I don't want to confuse you or the chair, and I might have done so. I apologize. Let's deal with the quality of the work as appeared in the report, rather than anything that the investigators may have done. Let's just put that aside for one moment. The comments you've just made about the audit and assessment in the report, do they apply?
Yeah, Chair, the 5 examples that I examined, it definitely does not show an assessment of asbestos. Even audit, it will give an indication of there is asbestos on this house because of the picture that they have taken and with the assumption that it might be asbestos. But apart from that, this whole report is structured around the structure, the integrity of the house itself, the building, the bricks and so on, but very, very, very little information other than a potential number of houses in a certain district. That is all that is outlined in this report.
So, in other words, are you saying that as the product of an assessment, which it is supposed to be, this report that the Blackhead and its joint venture partner prepared was lacking in quite a significant way?
Yes, Chairperson, it was definitely lacking. If you look at the original proposal, it called for the audit and assessment of asbestos. And it also called for assessment of asbestos containing rubble. I didn't find any information in the report about any rubble lying around. So even if you have to quote or tender on such a project, you did not have, or you do not have all the information available. As you previously say, audit would be a good description of what was done. And then the latter portion was left out in the report as well.
Okay.
It appears from the documentation that we have and the investigators have obtained that the whole purpose of the audit and assessment was to enable a second phase of removal and eradication. We have touched on this before, but in your report at page 20, you answer the question whether, in your opinion, the report that was produced, the final audit and assessment
You mean in his
report,
statement? You said in his report?
Any statement, I'm sorry, at
yeah.
page
20.
20, paragraph 38.
Yeah.
In your statement, you answer the question as to whether the report in its final form there could be used as a basis for an effective eradication program, removal and eradication program. What is your answer to that question?
Yes, Chair. My answer to it was that this document is not useful at all. It will not assist any of the contractors to effectively plan and cost such a big project. So yeah, ineffective.
What would they have to do in order to quote?
In terms of setting up a proper bill of quantities for people to quote on, they definitely need to redo this job.
So what you are saying is very important, and I just want to make sure that you are quite definite about it. If you are not so sure, you need to say so. Because Mr. Sodi is still going to come and give evidence here. Are you quite satisfied and are you quite definite that this report really is of not much use for purposes of any effective eradication of asbestos, and therefore whatever Blackhead and its joint venture charged for it when its mandate was to, or included to assess asbestos, this report is of either limited use or no use at all. Is that something you are quite definite about?
Yeah.
Or you want to put it a little lower than that?
Chairperson, what I want to say, and I think that I'm comfortable in saying about this, is that the proposal, the costing that they originally have done per house, if I use my calculation and experience, will definitely cover the cost. It will be a very high cost, but it will cover the cost. But this report that they have submitted will not give you the necessary information to accurately cost for a project like that, and to remove a project, because you can't assess the risk. You don't know what equipment to use, how much asbestos to transport, what is the transport requirements, how long this project is going to take to remove. So that information is definitely lacking in this report. It will not give the ordinary person on the street or registered asbestos contract enough ammunition to do this job properly.
And you say that the assessment would have to be redone.
According to me, I think the assessment needs to be
Yes.
redone and a proper bill of quantity set up.
Yes, okay.
Perhaps the point that you're making would be more graphically made by reference to the actual documentation in the report itself, or attached to the report. Can I ask you to go to FS9, Chair?
Yes, so, is that,
FS9, this is the
FS9.
investigator's report.
okay.
You have page 416. If you would go to page 416, please. And that's, well, perhaps no, don't go there yet. At the top of the page, you will see numbering in red. And at the top left, you will see numbering in black. The numbering in black, top left, is the numbering as advised by the Chair. The number in top right, I'm told, Chair, is the insistence, notwithstanding instructions for later record purposes of the bundlers, but we can ignore the red numbers for your purposes. Chair, let's look at FS9, page 3.
Yes, no, that's for what it's worth. If there has to be a renumbering such as the one they have done here with the black numbers, I think they should try, if possible, to put it also, to put those numbers also on the right side of the page, because when you are paging through, you can't see it where it is. It's difficult to see, so you go according to the red number page numbers, but then those are not the ones in regard to this particular bundle that one is following.
Yes, I took great care this last weekend to ensure that this was done in accordance with your instructions. And I remember reading somewhere that the black number should go on the top left. That was clearly an error on our part. And in future, it will go in top right.
No, that's fine. It's just that when you page through, if it's on the right-hand side, it's easy to see.
No, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Okay, you said page 3.
Page 3.
Okay.
Now, is this the type of information that was contained in the report in relation to a particular house?
Yes, Chair. These are some of the examples that I was provided to look at. And if you look at the information, it's very lacking in terms of identifying the potential risk of fiber release.
Well, what does it give you?
It actually just say that the roof material is asbestos. On this particular example, it gives you a partial picture of a house, and it's also saying that it's a pitched roof, where in this case it looks more like a flat roof. Talking about a pitched roof and a flat roof, it will assist in quantifying the amount of asbestos. Because you can multiply, if you've got a square meterage of a dwelling or a house, and you know it's a pitched roof, you can put in some calculation to get a closer estimation of a quantity. So it is important to have a correct information. But apart from that, this report that they've got per house doesn't give you any information about the asbestos. I've seen this maybe stepping off in terms of a training that was provided to the guys that was doing the assessment. The example of training that was provided, they didn't give the necessary information to the people that is doing the assessment to say this is what asbestos looks like. So only an example of the form, the shape of the material, but nothing about any other types of asbestos that they need to have a look at. So that information should filter through to an assessment like this so that you can do a proper and comprehensive assessment.
Let's go back to this page of information in relation to a particular house. Is this all the information that would be provided in the report in relation to a particular unit or dwelling?
That's correct. That's all the information that was provided. Even in the final report, they only give amounts of houses that contained asbestos, not quantities or nothing else. Only so much percentage of this district's houses contains asbestos. That's all the information.
So one looks at page 3 of bundle FS9, right? And one sees there in relation to a particular house certain information. You've got the earth number, you've got the GPS coordinates, and then under the structural assessment report, you have the fact, you have a photograph taken from a distance. The picture of the house is partly obscured by bushes. You then see that the information contained there is roof material asbestos, roof type pitch, house type single, finishes on wall plastered, visible wall cracks no, house extended yes, solar geyser no. That's the full assessment of that particular dwelling. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now that information then is collated with other information to tell the municipality that houses of this type or qualifying under these conditions or items of this nature with items of this nature, there are, say, 1,000 in this district, 1,000 in that district. But that's the sum total of what occurred.
That is the sum total, yes, Chair, of the information that is provided in the final report. Is they numbered the amount of houses that was inspected, and then they used this information to say such a big percentage of the houses in that specific district contains asbestos.
So if I took this page 3 that we're talking about and I gave it to you, and I said, Mr. Ritz, please tell me how much it would cost and what you would have to do to remove asbestos from this house, what would you tell me?
Well, Chair, I would definitely say I will submit a cost as soon as I went back to the site and assess the condition and the size, so that I can give a proper cost of the...
Now, if you look at the information that Mr. Pretorius was reading to you on page 3, in respect of this house, how much of the information given there is really relevant for purposes of assessment for asbestos?
Chair, the only information relevant...
Is the roof type of any relevance?
The type assist, if you have got a size of the ground square meterage of a house, the pitch or the type of house will assist. In this case, it will not assist.
Yes.
Even the picture on that, you can't clearly see that it is a big 6 type of panel. It looks like a galvanized sheet rather.
Yes.
So
And
if a person that did the assessment is not teach properly, educated properly, how to identify asbestos, then this might be misinformation.
And finishes on the wall? Finishes
Finishes
on
of
the
a
wall?
wall has got no
that of
bearing
any
on
relevance?
asbestos assessment.
No
No,
relevance.
Chair. No relevance.
Visible wall cracks,
No relevance.
no
Chair.
value. Whether the house is extended or not.
No relevance.
Solar geyser,
Potential relevance if it's a solar geyser versus maybe an old geyser that
Yeah.
have got insulation around.
Yeah.
It can be problematic.
Yeah.
But the solar, no
but
relevance.
to just say solar geyser, yes or no,
No relevance.
is no, it doesn't mean much.
Nothing.
Yes. So, roof material, asbestos, that's fine. But the rest is either irrelevant or marginally relevant.
Yes, Chairperson, if you look at the original proposal, the only thing that comes out of it for this specific example, it's the asbestos roof.
Yeah.
That's the only information.
Okay.
So basically, what the Department in the Free State is told here is simply that here is a picture of a house with a roof that looks like asbestos.
Yes, Chairperson, when I originally were asked to look at this, my original thought about the proposal versus the report is it was a good document for government to find out if there's a problem in a specific district, and that's all. No information that is relevant for anybody to go remove or eradicate to control asbestos at all.
Now, this might be difficult to say, but you must tell me. If, for purposes of an asbestos eradication program, because that's how it's referred to, it seems, if for that purpose you are given the task or a contract to do an audit and assessment, what percentage of the job would you say is represented by the auditing part of the job in terms of importance and value? Is that something you are able to say? Is it 50-50%? Is it 20-80? Or is it difficult to say?
I would say that the audit chair would give you a good idea of how big is the problem, and if you have got a problem. So in terms of, let's call it high-level management of asbestos or high-level knowledge about asbestos in your province or in certain districts, it's a very good tool. In terms of the eradication, and I think that is what the original purpose was, it doesn't give any information on the assessment of asbestos. So in the context of the original inquiry or purpose of this, I would say that the audit is about maybe 10% and the assessment would be 90%.
But if this job, the way it was done, would require, as you have said, if you are asked to do the next phase, which was meant to be eradication, as I understand the position, if it would require that you redo the assessment, would that not mean that, in effect, you would not need their auditing because you would have to necessarily audit as well?
Yeah. Yes, Chair, I totally agree with that statement. I think we have found out that there is asbestos in that district now. So I think the audit portion is gone. You don't need that information for the eradication anymore. And the biggest portion of work would now require the proper assessment and setting up a bill of quantities and prioritizing worse or better cases to start your work with.
So would it be correct, therefore, to say, for the purposes of an asbestos eradication program, doing auditing without doing an assessment doesn't help anyway, because an assessment can't be done without auditing. Therefore, if an assessment has to be done, whatever auditing may have been done before becomes redundant,
Yes.
because you are going to go to every house anyway. Would that be correct?
Yes,
Yes.
Chair, that would be correct. If one
So it's
maybe
not
look,
like you can build upon the work that they did in terms of auditing.
yeah.
You can't do that, because you will have to go to every house, and therefore you will get to know how many houses are involved.
Yeah. Yes, Chair, I think in terms of looking at future, maybe the audit will give you a good idea that I don't need to visit that specific district anymore because there's no asbestos or there was no asbestos identified.
Yes.
So I will not focus on that area.
Yes.
Or there's a very low amount of houses, so I might look at it at a later stage.
Yes.
Or use it as a training operation, maybe a training project. But the focus for moving from here on forward would be the assessment, 100% on an assessment. I would not spend that much time on the audit.
Okay.
You did a calculation just to illustrate some of the issues raised by the chair on page 21 of the, not of the report, but of the FS1 bundle, exhibit TT1. Go to page 21 of exhibit TT1 if you would. In the final paragraph, you did a calculation.
I'm sorry. We move it back to
page 21
to FS1.
of TT1. Yeah, we're in FS1, I'm sorry, yes.
Yes.
We're in FS1,
And then we go to 21, page 21.
21.
Okay, all right. And the 21, even on this bundle, FS1 is the black 21.
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right.
And look please at the second paragraph on that page.
Yes.
You did a calculation based on certain assumptions.
Yes.
You said if there were 300,000 houses assessed, which is the number that was in the documentation in this case, correct?
Sorry, Chair, I think pages is messed up in this copy.
All right, go back to, do you see the top left-hand column?
Just check if he has got the right bundle first, because
It is one, the report.
I think this might be a whole.
Yeah, but go to the black numbering. Top left.
So when there's a reference to a page number,
Got
look
it.
at the black numbers, not the right ones.
Got it, thanks.
Okay.
Look at paragraph 2, if you would.
Yes,
You did a calculation
that's correct,
on
Chair.
certain assumptions. Now, we know that the number of houses that had to be assessed here was not more than 300,000.
That's correct, Chair.
Correct. And we know in the final report that 155 workers were trained over a few days and were set to photograph houses,
That's correct, Chair.
right? And we know that according to the report, 31 days was spent doing this work.
That's
All this
correct.
work was done in 31 days.
That is correct, with a statement, Chair, in the final report that they had trouble with people being absent, coming to work, and some labor issues. So it might even be less than 31 days, but the time stated in the report is 31 days.
So you say it might even be less.
Might even be less.
Let's assume 31 days, and you work out that if that number of workers worked for 31 days in an attempt to cover 300,000 houses, you would have about 2 to 5 minutes per house.
That's correct, Chair.
That has to take into account too, walking between houses, getting access, taking the photographs, logging the data, and the like.
Yes, yes, Chair. I, just for interest sake, started with a calculation on the amount of houses. I think that they even mentioned that they had to do 6,000 houses extra additional that they went to. And they trained 155 people, of which some of them left and didn't return, and some of them were absent on several occasions. And I did a calculation on the amount of houses, time spent in these houses at the end of the day came out to about 2 to 5 minutes that they have to spend to assess a house, take a picture, lock the data into the handheld device that they were provided, and then submit the information to a central database. So, and then travel still to the next dwelling or next house and do the next assessment.
Right. In paragraph 41.2 on page 24 of your statement, TT1, you say what you would do in a project of a similar nature if you were briefed to do so.
That's correct.
That, please.
So the assessment for 300,000 houses in my capacity, in my business, I've got 7 personnel that is trained to do this. So I will probably plan, because I need to take all my people to the site and assess the asbestos, spend proper time allocation to each house to properly assess that house, photograph, capture all the information, so that I can set up a proper report for this. I would roughly take about 2 to 3 years to do assessment, a proper assessment of this nature.
And cost?
Cost calculation, anything between 20 million and 30 million for the entire project.
For a project taking almost 3 years.
Yes.
Now, when you say in paragraph 41 of your statement, how long it would take to do this kind of job,
If it is,
to what extent is that based on your own experience of being involved in this kind of job in the past years?
Chair, yes, I've been involved in several projects like this for the mining industry. And we spend roughly about 30 minutes per house, 30 minutes to 45 minutes. A lot of the time is spent to actually gain access to a house because people tend to go to work sometimes. And so you battle to get into a house, and sometimes you have to set up a specific time after work to go assess houses like this. So it definitely hinders your assessment and time that you have to spend. But I would say anything between 30 and 40 minutes spent per house to properly assess and lock all the information, plus time spent on the final report to get all this information into a proper bill of quantities. So in total, I would say around about 30 to 40 minutes per house estimation.
Okay.
Is there anything you wish to add in relation to any of the questions you've been asked or in relation to your report?
No, Chair, I'm finished.
Thank you.
On a few occasions in your report and in your oral evidence, you have indicated that your opinion is based on the information you were given. And I got the impression that there may be instances where you would have liked to have more information. Is that correct? Are there areas where you would have liked to have more information in order to give an opinion or to give a more definitive opinion?
Yes, Chair. Certainly when I had a first look at the information, there was definitely a lack of definition in terms of the requirement from the requester side to outline what is needed. So guidance for the contractor maybe on what is meant by the words audit and assess, and what is the outcome that I would like from such an assessment. So information like that is definitely, if there was any, would assist in making proper comments. If all this information, I had 5 examples of houses that was assessed, I would have liked maybe 1 or 2 of the examples of bigger dwellings, bigger houses, houses that might also contain fascia boards and ceiling panels, and see what is the information that was actually recorded on those houses, so that one can make a fair comment about asbestos other than roof sheeting. Because what I've seen from the information that I've got is that, firstly, these 155 people that was used, there might be a problem in terms of how they were actually told to assess, what is the level of training that were provided. The little information that was provided in the final report certainly did not tell them what does asbestos look like. And I think that should have been the first thing that came out. To, let's call it, declare somebody competent to do an assessment, to do asbestos assessment. So that information will definitely assist more to make comments about it. But the information provided and the final product that was provided in terms of the final report certainly show that there was no clear indication in the beginning of what is required. What do I want?
Okay, but what I would like is that if there is any information that you didn't get, which the investigators may have access to, that they make an attempt to get you that information, and if necessary, you can do a supplementary statement or affidavit to supplement your evidence, to say, when I prepared my affidavit stroke statement of 30 July 2020, in respect of this aspect, this is what I had, but I've since had access to the following, and I stand by what I said, or in the light of this further information, I have a different view, and this is what I wish to say. That's what I would like you to do. Is that all right?
That's right. Thanks, Chief.
Okay.
I may, Chair, two things in your answer to the Chair. You mentioned, firstly, information given to the contractors by the department as to what was required of them. You say that was information that was inadequate.
Yes, Chair. I was just looking at the amount of money that we're talking about, and the original proposal, I think it is 6 or 7 pages long of information that will be done, of which 2 pages was about the asbestos and the rest was about the structure and the engineering of a project. And then the appointment from the other side was 2 pages for 255 million rand to assess and eradicate, or the first phase, as they call it, is the assessment, audit and assessment of the asbestos. So yeah, in terms of my view of the documentation that was pricing this whole project, it was very, very limited.
Yes, you make the point that in a couple of pages, an instruction was given to perform work, and that work was described in relation to a project ostensibly, and I stress ostensibly, worth 255 million rand.
That's correct.
But you then went on to talk about a second category of information, that is the information that you were given.
That's correct.
And you commented on the fact that that information was sparse. But we should note that that is precisely the information that the contractors gave to the department.
That's correct. That's the information that was provided to the department as a final product. The 5 examples that I did receive, it was the final product in terms of the assessment that has got very, very little information.
Tell me, if the department had consulted somebody or somebody who has knowledge and experience of the type of job that Blackhead and Diamond Hill were given to do you think, based on your experience, that they could have agreed to pay so much money for the auditing and assessment of asbestos in this project?
I think, Chair, that if they were provided some assistance from people in the field that has got knowledge of such projects, they might have thought that this money is a little bit too much to give for such little work. Yes.
But what I'm talking about is, you see, I'm a judge. If I'm going to give somebody a job to do electrical work in my house, I need to have an idea what electricians normally charge, because otherwise, if I don't have an idea about that, I could be charged an arm and a leg and I wouldn't know. And then I pay, and then I found out later that I paid far more than I should have been charged. Now, in the context of the department, I would have thought that unless the people who made the decisions have the knowledge and experience of what is required in this type of job and what should be charged, unless they themselves had that knowledge, I would have expected that they would seek a professional who could advise them to say, one, is this price that is being proposed here a reasonable price in the industry for this kind of job? And if the advice was, no, this is too much, then they would go back to Blackhead and Diamond Hill and say, no, we can't agree to that.
Yes.
But if they were told, no, this is a reasonable price, and they are able to rely on that advice, then they would go along. So my question is whether you think if they had consulted somebody who might have the same kind of experience as yourself in the sector, whether that person would have advised that the price they agreed to pay was reasonable for this kind of job.
Yes, Chair, definitely. If they benchmark with the assistance of a approved inspection authority or one of these asbestos contractors that handled such a big contract, they will definitely make a better decision on the amount that they have to pay for this type of work. And also to define in terms of the documentation provided that this is what I need. The product that I, at the end of the day, require need to be in line with the asbestos regulation. So that
Yes. Yes. And you say that based on your experience in the industry, a reasonable price for this kind of job would have been between 20 million and 80 million rand, is that right?
That is correct. Chair, I've actually estimated a lower cost, my cost in terms of time spent and resources spent, I think came out to about 8 to 9 million rand.
Yes.
And then I even went to town and called it 20 million.
Yes.
So that we can just compare it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the cost is definitely less than 255 million rand.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Roots. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roots, for coming to assist the Commission. Thank you for coming to give evidence. If necessary, we'll ask you to come back, but if possible, try and spare you the trouble. But if there is any further information that can be given to you, which you had not been given to you, which you think is important in order for me to have a proper and correct picture of your evidence about this project, please talk to the investigators and the legal team so that that can be done, so that one will have a correct picture.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. You are excused.
Thank you.
Mr. Pretorius.
Chair, the witness that was to follow is Mr. John Matlakala. He is the procurement person in the department in the Free State, Human Settlements Department in the Free State. Much of the arrangement for this week happened before you asked me to deal with the evidence and lead the evidence, Chair. So what I say, I have only in a broad detail. I've taken instructions over the long adjournment. Mr.
Yes.
Matlakala was informed on the 14th of July that he would be required to attend at the Commission during the week of the 3rd to the 7th of August. He was then informed on the 27th of July that he would be required to come on the 5th of August. That date, he was informed, was changed when we arranged the detail to the 4th of August, and at all stages he agreed that he would come on the 4th of August. Then on the 3rd of August, yesterday, we received an email from Mr. Matlakala saying that he was no longer represented and he would tell us when he was represented and when he could then appear. In response to that, a letter was drafted and sent to Matlakala advising him that he had confirmed his availability, a date had been reserved, and he must attend. And if he has anything to say about his appearance and representation, he must apply to you, Chair. It's not in our province as evidence leaders and as investigators to grant or refuse postponements and the like when dates have been arranged. And this was told to him in a letter dated the 3rd of August 2020, confirming that he was required to appear today. We received a reply today from Matlo attorneys representing Mr. Matlakala, who said, or who say in the email, that they act on behalf of Mr. Matlakala, that they acknowledge that he was required to provide oral evidence before the Commission today, but they say, kindly take note that our officers received instructions during the course of the midnight hours on 3 August 2020. So that's midnight hours last night, I presume that means, and have been unable to adequately prepare a substantive application for postponement in terms of Rule 11, and accordingly request a postponement of the proceedings today to allow our client adequate legal representation. We trust that you find that in order. I think we've tried to respond verbally to that, but there's been no response to that, and Mr. Matlakala did not arrive, and that's the position we're in now with regard to Mr. Matlakala.
So he's not here. I'm beginning to wonder whether the Commission shouldn't just issue summonses against everybody, because it looks like the stage at which we are, more and more people come up with some or other reason for not appearing. And whereas in the past, just notification to people seemed to be enough, at least for most, for them to come and appear. But now we issue notifications and people either don't come or send emails to put up one or other reason for saying they won't be able to come. So it seems that we must really seriously consider compelling everybody. Yes, otherwise we will keep on having these problems.
Yes, one of the significant differences between the witnesses, or many of the witnesses, not all, many of the witnesses that are now presenting evidence before you, Chair, is that they are in one way or another implicated, yes, and are being called to account.
Yes.
So it seems, yes, there the reluctance is creeping in.
Yes.
Well, not creeping in, rushing in.
Yes, yes, yes. So I think that probably each work stream must have a look in the weeks ahead and see people who have been notified to appear and apply their minds to the question of a summons, even if a notice to appear has already gone, to consider whether a summons shouldn't be issued to make sure that people will be here. And if they are, because then failure to appear when there is a summons that has been served will be a criminal offense.
Yes, indeed, Chair.
Yeah.
The problems don't end there, though, because Mr. McKessie, who is the accounting officer of the Free State Department, has also raised certain issues. He agreed to come during the week when notified on the 15th of July. He was then informed of a particular date, and it appears he confirmed that he would appear on the 5th of August of 2020. However, last week we received an email saying that they had only received 6 clear court days notice. That's incorrect. They received over 2 weeks notice and agreed to attend on that basis. And then requesting an alternative convenient date. The attorney said he's not available on 6 days notice. Well, that is a matter between attorney and client. The client had been given many more days than that, and his counsel apparently has tested positive for COVID-19. So that's the situation there. We have sent a similar letter, the secretary sent a similar letter to Mr. Mkesi on the 3rd of August yesterday, acknowledging the correspondence and the communications, and saying that please be advised that it is not within the power or discretion of the investigators or the legal team to excuse you from appearing on the commission on 5 August. You're therefore required to appear as agreed and explain any reasons you might have for a postponement of your evidence. And that's the situation with Mr. Mkesi. My instructions are that we are told that he's not responded to that. We will make further inquiries, both of the attorneys and Mr. Mkesi himself, and revert to you, Chair. Thursday and Friday are full, though, more than full.
Yeah. Mr. Mkesi was supposed to appear tomorrow.
Yes.
Yes. I guess that, well, I will be handing down my decision in relation to Mr. Fuzile's application for leave to cross-examine Mr. Van Rooyen tomorrow at 10. So I guess that if Mr. Mkesi has not made a substantive application, what was his reason for, or is it the lawyer who says, I'm not available within six days?
Ms. Mkesi acknowledged receipt of notice,
Yes.
agreed to attend,
Yes.
agreed to attend during the week, and then on the particular day, tomorrow.
Yeah.
It seems he only gave his attorney 6 days
Yes.
or short notice
Yeah.
for the attorney to prepare
Yeah.
and brief counsel.
Yeah.
Counsel that they wanted to appear
Yes.
has COVID, and the attorney says he hasn't had enough time to
Yes.
prepare.
Well, I think in that position, we must be here at 10 o'clock. When I finish with my decision, we will be expecting him to be here. And if he is not here, I mean, if he is here to make an application for a postponement, we'll deal with that. If he is here, is able to give evidence, we continue. And if we are here and he is not here, to either make an application for a postponement or give evidence, then we will have to deal with that default on his part.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll have to, because it would mean he was asked to be here, he agreed to be here, and then decided not to be here.
Yes.
On his own.
That against the background of having to appear and having been given every opportunity to appear and answer the case
Yes,
that
yes.
was made.
And it's serious for anybody not to appear in those circumstances, but I think it's even more serious when we are talking about either an HOD or a former HOD of any department who's an accounting officer or was an accounting officer.
Correct.
So we will be here. If he is not here, then we'll look at the situation and necessary decision will be taken.
Thank you, Chair. In the meanwhile, I'll communicate your directive to the evidence leaders
Yeah,
in regard to summons.
yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, we will then adjourn for the day.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.